All right, so my name's Fernando Socol. I'm an immigration attorney here in Miami, Florida for 21 years. I practice full service immigration, just about everything, but I focus mainly on employment-based cases, extraordinary ability, EB-5, but I've dabbled in, deportation defense, litigation, and immigration, family cases, of course, asylum, all those kind of things, TPS, DACA, all the popular new types of cases. Okay, so basically, there's two types of immigration or movement of people due to what's going on in the world. One is the slow onset of climate change, which is obviously all the changes that are happening in terms of temperature, crops, changes in rain patterns, solar radiation, things that are affecting people and moving in long-term situations. But the other one would be what we're going to cover today, which is sudden disasters and how that is affected by immigration and what immigration can do to help in that kind of situation. And of course, my focus is going to be on U.S. immigration law because I'm a U.S. immigration lawyer. So we're going to talk about things that inside the United States, what they are doing in terms of helping people that are already here and people that are outside the U.S., right? Obviously, there's a lot of things that affect how certain peoples are affected by natural disasters. Their social standing is very important. Obviously, people that are in poverty are going to be affected much more than other people that can get out of the situation. Education matters too. Racism, of course. In some parts of the world, like Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, religious persecution is a big factor. And other discriminations that's not based on race, such as age discrimination, like happens a lot in Latin America, sex discrimination, against women, basically. So those are all factors that affect how people are affected by natural disasters. In the U.S., we have several things that are offered for people that are affected by natural disasters. And when we talk about natural disasters, of course, we're talking about floods, hurricanes, volcanoes, earthquakes, things that are more sudden than long-term effects of climate change. Even though those things are obviously caused by climate change, but they're more sudden events that affect people. So the main one would be TPS, temporary protected status. That would be people that are inside the US when the natural disaster happens. For instance, we have TPS for the last 10, 20 years for Honduras, for an earthquake that happened a long time ago there. Nicaragua also. The latest one is Venezuela. Venezuela is the latest edition, and it's not really like a natural disaster that happened in Venezuela, but more just the economic and political collapse of the country there. You guys are in Omaha, Nebraska, so there may not be many Venezuelans there, but here in Miami, there's a lot. There's more than 500,000 Venezuelans that have immigrated here. And the thing with TPS is it only protects those that were inside the US at the time that the TPS is announced. The TPS can be announced by either Congress or the president. And therefore, it's not really a magnet for people to come here after the natural disaster. So that's the cutoff date. When it's announced, the people must have already been here present in the US. They could be present legal or illegal. It doesn't matter. It still protects them. And the idea is that these people can't return to their country safely, and the US is giving them temporary protective status so that they can be here legally and work while the emergency happens in their country. Okay, so that's for people that are already here when this is announced. Anybody else from that country that after it's announced, even if it's family members of people that are here, you cannot bring them here. It's impossible, okay? The other thing is trying to come here from outside the US. That would be refugee status. A lot has been talked about refugee status in the last administration with President Trump. He limited, if you recall, to 15,000 per year for the whole country, which is very little, very small drop in the bucket. Biden is expanding it so that in the next 2 years, they're going to bring 62,000 per year, which is still a very slow amount of people, very limited amount of people. And the refugee status takes a long time to get approved. There's a vetting process, which is very extensive. And they go through a very rigorous examination that takes about 2 years before they can actually come here. Basically, it's the same as asylum, but for people that are outside the US. When you're inside the US, you ask for asylum. That would be the mechanism, but you have to actually make it to the United States in order to request asylum. In past times, like in the 70s and 60s, people would go to a US embassy, in Poland or Russia, whatever, and try to declare asylum inside that embassy. But that's not really possible anymore because the embassies are like fortresses. And so you can only go there if you make an appointment. And if you make an appointment for a consular issue, that's not considered really to be inside the United States to ask for asylum. So asylum can only be requested when you're inside physically the United States. Okay, it doesn't matter how you get here. You can even get here illegally and cross the border, and you can still request asylum. You could even come in on a fake passport. I'm not recommending this, but I'm just saying people can come in on a fake passport and still request asylum and get past the charge of fraud with a fake passport if they show that that's part of their only way of getting here to evade persecution is to create this fake or come up with a fake passport to enter. That's the only situation that this kind of fraud is allowed. I mean, any other situation, you would be banned for life from coming to the U.S. with any kind of fraud like that. But with asylum, and the asylum is created really through an international Geneva Convention that almost every country has signed, which is an international law issue where if a person can get to that country and they show that they have a credible fear of persecution, that's the legal standard, they can ask for asylum. And it's an international right. It's an international human right. Okay. The other thing that immigration, which is called USCIS, does, it used to be called INS, now it's called USCIS for more than 20 years. The other thing they do for people that have suffered natural disasters is they'll give you flexibility in terms of changing status or extending your visa. They'll give you more time, case-by-case basis. You have to show how that affected you and your ability to file your case, but they will give you some deference if you explain the situation. In the case of Venezuelan students, they gave them the right to ask for work permits, which, F1 students usually cannot work until they graduate, but they gave them that special need because they realized that they were financially in hardship. So immigration gives you some kind of flexibility. They're not very flexible, to be quite honest. They're very slow, but sometimes if you get the people that care, they will help you out. The other thing that we have for people that are more like, scientists or professionals is the national interest waiver and extraordinary ability. These are direct green cards where you can file if, in the case of national interest waiver, you have a master's degree or a postgraduate degree, 10 years of experience, and you have something that's in the national interest, like you're a software engineer or you're an environmental engineer or you're a financial expert that analyzes, the origin of funds for banks to make sure it's not something that's, drug money or money laundering. People that are going to help against, for instance, ransomware, software people, all these things that are in the news now that the U.S. needs. If you can show that you have those degrees and the experience and you can come here to help the U.S. in our national interest, you can file for a direct green card and be accepted without the need of an employer filing for you, because there's other categories where you need an employer to file the green card or the visa for you. And for visas, someone cannot unilaterally say, I want a work permit or I want to come to the US and work. It doesn't work that way. You have to have an employer that first files for you. And the only exceptions are these two cases right here, which are the EB1 and EB2, national interest waiver and extraordinary ability. Those are more long-term types of cases. They take about a year to get approved, sometimes a little faster, but it's not a real fast process. Like anything in immigration, it's not very fast. So those are the main items that immigration has, the main avenues that immigration has for helping people that are involved in natural disasters. The other recent change that happened is the Biden administration issued an executive order to increase the number of refugees that are coming here and to come up with a global plan of how global warming is going to affect migration in general in the world and the US, and how we can prepare for that. And I think that's the next thing that's coming is there's going to be more global migrants than any time since World War II, caused by climate change, and that's going to affect the world in very big ways. But my focus today was on immigration in the US and what the US is doing to help people go through natural disasters. I'll take any questions if people want questions or clarifications.
Fernando, thank you for that. I do have a couple of questions. First, very simple. These kind of categories are the same around the world, or this is just for the US?
This is just for the US because that's my expertise. I mean, asylum is a worldwide thing. Refugees is a worldwide thing. And every country has their own different structure of visas and who can come in. Canada has like a point system, and every country has a totally different immigration system. So the only thing that I could say is universal would be asylum and refugee.
Okay. And so what do you know about, so I have a couple of mixed questions. What happens, or what would be the things that for my students studying emergency management should be aware when their concern are the focus of attention is American citizens abroad? So either because they happen to be in a place when there is a natural disaster abroad, right? Or when something happens in the United States, and for whatever reason, I don't think this has ever happened, but in the case of extreme circumstances such as Katrina, for instance, or a massive snowstorm, if they happen to be stuck abroad, what would be the implications for them?
Yeah, one thing that a lot of people don't know about is when you're a US citizen traveling abroad and there's a US embassy there, you can register with that US embassy when you get there. That's what I used to do when I went to Venezuela, which is a very dangerous country. I used to register with the US embassy as a US citizen traveling there. And if something happens, you're kidnapped or some kind of emergency, you can contact the US embassy and they will try to find you or help you. And at least they know that you're registered, and they kind of, you know, the dates that you're going to be traveling. And if somehow you don't leave on the date that you were supposed to, you know, they can have a record of it and start to investigate. So that's what I recommend for any US citizen traveling to like a very dangerous area. Now, natural disasters, you don't know when that's going to happen, so you can't pre-register, right? But it's just prudent to go when you're going to another country to register with that embassy as a US citizen traveling there. And it's very easy to do online. So that would be the main thing that I would suggest. And then try to reach out to the US embassy in that country. And they will try to help US citizens that are there during natural disasters as much as they can. Sometimes, you know, they don't have electricity in the whole country, the roads are blocked, whatever the case may be. But the US embassy will try to help you if there's US citizens there in danger.
Thank you for that. Guys, do you have any other questions, or do you mind if I go on?
I've got one real quick one.
Sure.
For the TPS, that's more like a blanket protected status. Is that correct?
Yeah, it protects you. It gives you legal status, and it gives you a work permit. for whoever's here and their family, which would be their spouse or their children under 21. That's what it does. And it's a blanket protection for anyone from that country, correct? You don't have to show an individual claim like you do with asylum. Asylum, it's not per country. It's that person's case, right? And then this one would be TPS is a blanket protection from anybody from that country that happens to be inside the US when that happens, when the natural disaster happens.
And I have another, which is very current and important question for the world of emergency management today. As a Latino myself, one of the things that we have been finding, especially in the last couple of years with COVID-19, but it has happened many times before, right? So we, emergency managers in the United States, when they are, going through their planning processes, they have to approach those, like whatever scenario they have in front of them with what we call, an all hazards and a whole community approach. So we have to have everybody in mind. We have to protect everybody. But one of the things that we know that continues to fail is the protection of minorities, right? Or people with disabilities and actually migrants and whatnot. In the particular case of COVID-19, and also in cases when, like as Argentinian myself, or the case of Venezuelans, when you have a political instability in your country of origin, we are here, like emergency managers are in the US, and they find themselves having to protect families. But the problem is not the families that are in the US, but the families overseas. And so you have, for instance, that large caravan from Central America that came, and then you had during the Trump era, thousands and hundreds of thousands of migrants trying to come walking, and then they were stopped in the border with Mexico. So what do you know? What can you tell us about immigration when, you have those kind of two sides of the same coin? You have immigration that actually affects the people that are trying to come into the US, but then we are supposed to, as people that are in the US already, we have to protect those that are in the US. That from the point of view, exclusively from the point of view of emergency management, we say, well, you are okay, like myself, somebody is thinking about the Argentinian population in the US. And you say, well, Diego, you are okay, there is nothing special that I have to do to protect you. But then my subsequent question is, well, actually, or my claim is that you have to consider that there are other things that are happening outside of the US that affect me. And that includes, immigration, my family's well-being, and some family members that might be trying to come into the US because they need to be protected. So what can you tell us about those situations?
Okay, that's a great question. In the case of TPS, there's absolutely nothing that can be done. I have a lot of people that are in that situation, that they were here when it was announced, but other family members were outside, and there's absolutely no way to join those two together, unfortunately, because TPS is a temporary immigration status. So you don't have the right to confer that status to your family that's abroad. Other ones, like the green card that you do or a visa, you can bring your family later if they're outside. If the US embassy is open in that country, which is a problem right now in Argentina, as you know, Diego, it's been closed for most things. But if somebody here has legal status and the family wants to come, again, family is spouse or kids under 21, then there is a mechanism to bring the family here. It may not be very fast, but there is a mechanism to bring the family here to join the person that's already here lawfully. If it's asylum and one of the persons in the family enters, then that asylum has to be approved for the principal before they can bring their family here. Unless the family makes it here on their own, there's no special mechanism to bring the family until the asylum is called an asylee and they're approved for asylum. Then there's a process called follow to join, where you can bring your family so they can follow to join you in the United States. And that can happen with a green card or with a visa also. So for TPS, there's nothing you can do to bring family members here. And I have families that are divided in Venezuela because of that. The ones that are here don't want to leave because they have TPS, and the other family members are outside and they can't come in. And they don't give Venezuelans tourist visas nowadays, so it's very difficult for them to rejoin them. But with other more permanent status, we can bring the family from abroad to join them.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Fernando, do you guys have any other final questions?
Yeah, I just have one more. I know refugee status can take up to 2 years. How long is the asylum process once somebody does make it to the U.S.?
Okay, great question, Colby. It's very slow because normally it would be a year or two, but since the Venezuelan crisis, there's been a ton of applications, and I have a case pending 5 years, and it's not unusual for you to wait 3 to 5 years for a decision. It's really, really very slow.
So what do you do in that instance if you're waiting? If the case is just pending,
Right.
Are they sent back, or are you allowed
No.
to stay in the U.S.
No,
until a decision's made?
That's a good question. They're allowed to stay, and after 5 months of the case pending, you can ask for a work permit. So you're here in a quasi-legal status. You're not illegal, and you're here. You can work, and until your case is decided, you have a right to stay here. Yeah.